everyone. I am extremely excited today to have the opportunity to be sitting and speaking with Finn. Finn, welcome to this show. Can you please tell us about your professional role?
Absolutely. So I have a few. My background is as a public health research professional. And so in that role, I'm really trained to critique medical evidence and understand how it applies to our communities. So one of the things I do in that role is I really think about what types of literature and evidence will serve our communities and what are the gaps and how can we figure out the information that's actually going to help us within what's available. So that's one thing that I've done that I've obviously done for many years. And then on the other side, I'm a writer and a speaker, a storyteller. And so I have a weekly essays newsletter that I put out often about my experiences currently as a pregnant trans man, but also about sort of a broader conversation. And my role there is to inspire us to think about how we think about the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. And so many people kind of think that these are very different professional roles. But for me, they come together in terms of how do we, as queer people, as LGBTQ plus people, how do we claim our narrative authority in whatever way makes sense for us? So that's what I'm up to. That's my project.
That's you kind of all shoved into a nutshell, but it's an awful
Yeah.
lot. I mean, you take the pin out and it's
So
going to
we can,
explode because it pops.
yeah,
It's big.
yeah. We're gonna unpack it.
There
But
you
go
go.
ahead.
How can the work that you do, and you've touched on this, but I'd like you to
Yeah.
delve a little bit deeper. How does the work that you do specifically help the 2S LGBTQIA plus community start or grow their respective families?
So I think that one thing that comes up as our community is growing our families, and this is something I have direct personal experience with, is that we are often invited into narratives that can be very disempowering for us. So often we have to engage some kind of expert, be it a physician, be it a legal expert. And there are many wonderful experts, many of which you have here on your podcast, on your show, but it feels disempowering. Even if someone is very compassionate towards us, it doesn't feel very good sometimes to wonder, am I getting the right information? Is this person understanding me? And so one of the things that I focus on is how do we become more confident that we understand the questions to ask and that we can move ahead feeling that we're grounded in what we're doing.
Mhm.
And so in my professional work in the area of public health, I focus a lot on how can we educate ourselves about the literature? How do we know what questions to ask of our medical provider? How can we identify where the care being provided might be heterosexist in a subtle way, but it's being presented to us as just like, oh, that's how it is. That's what the evidence supports. So how can we kind of know enough to ground ourselves in the decisions that we're making? And
Mhm.
then on the other side, as a writer and storyteller, what I really look at and what I come down to is this a narrative that serves me? And so right now, I think a lot about this.
Mhm.
I'm a pregnant trans guy. I've just gotten to my third trimester, which is so exciting.
It is.
I have a little baby bump that everyone doesn't realize what's going on, but they see it, which is so fascinating. And so I get invited into a lot of narratives. Like sometimes they're positive, like, oh, you're so brave. Oh, this is so unusual. But with each of those, I have to ask myself, does this serve me? Does this serve my family? Does this help me to feel grounded and empowered? Or does this make me feel uncomfortable or othered? And if
Mhm.
so, how do I let that go and make sure I don't take that on for myself? So again, even though these two projects of mine are quite different, they're all about us being in our power and authority as we move through this process.
Absolutely. Are there things that you may look for working in the capacity that you do that your cisgendered heterosexual peers may not even know to look for?
Yes. I think that one of the reasons that I pursued a public health career is that I saw how the existing research literature was framed about around cissexist and heterosexist assumptions. So at the time that I transitioned, just to give an example, uh, a lot of the literature was looking at the health impacts of hormone therapy and comparing with a cisgender control group. But we know that individuals who need hormone therapy have other things going on for themselves. They might be experiencing gender dysphoria, they might have other stressors in their life. So it's not actually exactly a valid comparison. It
Mhm.
makes hormone therapy looks more dangerous than it might actually be. And so I was noticing this kind of thing come up a lot in the areas of LGBTQ health and in the areas of other types of reproductive health care. And I wanted to contribute to that conversation. So I think my personal experiences have really honed
Mm.
my desire to look critically at what I'm being told. Um, Other examples, like when I was going through my own fertility journey, I was told that there were things in the medical evidence that were not. They were just not there. And because I knew, like, sometimes people say things that aren't
Mhm.
quite so, I was able to look for that and to push back and to have different decisions be made in my healthcare than were initially presented to me. And that felt very important. And I want everyone to have that empowerment and that opportunity. So that's something that I educate people about in terms of medical literature, medical literacy, and self advocacy. Um, and then, right now, obviously, I'm in the middle of a big personal situation.
Mhm.
And so I'm always having to ask myself, what story am I being told about who I am? And is this a story I want to be in? And if so, how do I get out of it? Because even if, someone is saying to me, like, this is, your situation is so unusual or this or that, like, I get to decide if I'm going to take that in. And so
Mhm.
that's something I work on a lot right now.
And I would assume, not having been in your position, but I would assume that that is projected on you from all angles, from all kinds of people that you know, that you don't know, that are there in a care provider type of role, that are there on the subway with you, all of the time. It must be a lot to shoulder.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I would say that that's accurate. And so I think what I like to frame that as is a question of strategy,
Mm.
and a question of what techniques are going to help me to get through this process in a way that feels whole and integrated. And so I've learned a lot about those. There is certain types of energy work that I do in terms of issues with the subway. With care providers, I think that sometimes this can be so psychologically upsetting when these things happen. And
Mhm.
I have to decide, like, what is a strategic approach? So, what's a strategic approach to my self care?
Mhm.
And then what's a strategic approach externally? So, there's always those two sides.
Mhm.
Um, and I think also, especially for the transgender community, in our advocacy work, we often share these stories of very negative things that occur with care providers, and they absolutely do. And not all of us can access good care. And also, it is possible for some of us to find a good care provider. And it's important for me to keep that in mind so that if I have one negative experience, I'm going to call somebody else.
Mhm.
I'm going to try again. And so that's another example where sometimes what happens, what we want to focus on in an advocacy context, and what we want to focus on in terms of empowering ourselves around our own healthcare might actually be different.
Excellent. Yeah, that is a wise statement because we've been taught to put them on a pedestal and sort of revere their knowledge. And to be fair, care providers have a lot of knowledge that they can impart to us, but it's okay for us to feel that that particular individual is not imparting their knowledge and sharing their wisdom with us in a way that is healthy for us.
Yeah, and I think that depending on, a variety of factors in terms of where someone lives, what kind of insurance you have, a lot of different aspects of privilege, your options vary. But
Sure.
you always get to decide, like, what strategy am I going to use, right? So
Mhm.
maybe my strategy is I'm literally going to call the next person in the phone book because I live somewhere where there's a lot of people. And maybe my strategy is, this is literally the only doctor in this radius that can see me who takes my insurance. And then you say, okay, well, within that, how can I strategize? How am I going to interact with this person? How am I going to prepare for my visits? How am I going to care for myself before and after those visits so that this can be the best situation it can be for me, even if this person maybe wasn't my first choice? So,
Mhm.
kind of our options look different, but we always have options in terms of how we approach something and how we care for ourselves.
Absolutely. Are there any pearls of wisdom that you've learned over the years that people who speak to you, who read your writing, and hear the words that you share, are especially lucky to learn from you that they wouldn't learn from someone else?
Well, that is asking me to speak for other people's experience, which I really try not to do.
Fair.
I will say that the two areas that I've gotten a lot of feedback on are my writing about, I said, realness is a gift we give ourselves.
Mhm.
And I wrote that about coming to see myself as a real writer. Because obviously, when I became a public health professional, like I went to school, I got a degree, I got certain publications, I felt very like, oh, this is real. And I didn't have that trajectory as a writer. So how could I give that to myself? But it actually applies to pretty much any way that we claim our own knowledge,
Mhm.
and so it's really something that we can give ourselves, and we can give ourselves on our fertility journey, whether that's feeling like I know the information that I need to make a grounded decision. Or, of course, many of us, we might have individuals in our lives who suggest that our families are less real, or things like that.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
how do we stay grounded and care for ourselves when that
Mhm.
happens to us? So, realness is a gift we give to ourselves.
I think that's a pretty amazing pearl of wisdom to share with others, quite frankly. That's just my take on it. You are going through this process. You've touched on different times and different ways that you've been othered. Is there anything we haven't talked about? Are there any other ways that you feel that you've been othered through your journey to becoming a parent?
I think that it's important to hold space for the many ways in which this journey looks different emotionally,
Mhm.
um, and to make sure that we are seen and supported in that, regardless of what that looks like for us. I actually have a small collection of essays that is about my healing from the period of time when I experienced infertility. So,
Mhm.
although I'm pregnant right now, I actually thought that I was infertile and I grieved that before
Mhm.
this current pregnancy. And I think the fact that my inability to get pregnant involved, a donor, and that it involved going to a fertility clinic made my experience different than perhaps, a heterosexual couple's experience. And I think also because of my gender identity, it felt very disappointing, like, oh, this is something my body can do, even though my body is so complicated, and then my body couldn't do it.
Mhm.
And so there were a lot of aspects of that experience that were different. And I think we need to hold space for the fact that these aspects of our experience may be different in various ways, and we may not see them reflected. And so, how can we claim our own authority and say, this is what happened to me, even if we don't see it reflected in mainstream narratives of fertility journeys or infertility? or what have you. And then understanding that expertise in medical literature comes with cultural biases. And so if
Mhm.
something doesn't feel right, you get to ask yourself and you get to explore that until you feel a sense of clarity about it. And those are skills that anyone can learn. You don't need to get a particular degree to learn the basic skills that can help you develop that confidence and grounding.
Yeah. Are you aware of another show that is like this, that tells the stories of members of our community, from a personal or a professional experience, where all of the speakers are part of the community and have an awareness of their own piece, recognizing that each person's piece of the community is unique and individual. And would you find benefit? I mean, I get you must, you've agreed to be a part of this show, but um, do you see merit in there being a grouping of all of this information and resources to be shared with others? And is there something that you would really want to make sure that was included in this conversation?
I mean, I think this is a really wonderful space where people can come and hear from a lot of different professionals in one place and a lot of different personal journeys in one place. And I think it's rare to have that organized and curated so thoughtfully. I think there are places that people can go and, make a post in an online forum, but you don't know like who you're going to hear from or who they really are. And
Mhm.
here we're seeing people's faces, we're hearing from them in a really structured and helpful way. And so I really think that's very valuable.
Excellent. Are there any stories that you would want to see, or professions you would want to see represented in the dialogue, so that we hear a diverse enough grouping of stories to feel like we're making informed decisions about our own choices?
I think that you have covered a lot here, and I'm really excited to see who else you invite to join. I think that one of the things I like about who you've selected so far is that often we do primarily tend to focus on sort of the medical professional angle. And I feel like you have also included a lot of support individuals, like folks who do certain types of counseling, as well as folks who do certain types of other types of healing work, as well as understanding the financial piece and things like that.
Mhm.
And so I feel like this seed that you've created really speaks to the fact that we have a very holistic journey. Um, and so for me, I love that there are so many different types of healing workers out there. And there's also so many different approaches in terms of doula work. Some people are fertility doulas, which I think you had. There's like
Mhm.
postpartum doulas. There are doulas around pregnancy loss. And so I think there's just a lot of space to keep widening
Mhm.
people's awareness of that circle of support. A lot of people know like I need a doctor, I need a lawyer, I might need a financial planner, but knowing, they might want a doula, they might want Reiki, they might, want a chiropractor, which you have, and kind of widening people's
Mhm.
understanding of the circle of support that might be available to them.
Thank you. That is my goal. That is to reach
Yeah.
as many people and cover as many sides, and to recognize, even if I've got a lactation consultant coming in, that I have more than one, because they all approach things just a little bit differently, right? Because every profession is not just one narrow line of work that someone does. So that, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And one more point on that is
Mhm.
that every profession, I love that. Every profession isn't just one narrow line of work that someone does. And so I think as you get more people who are from the same profession, that can give folks an idea of like, oh, I didn't like this person's approach, but I like that person's approach. And that can really empower us as we choose our own providers.
That's true. That's very, very true. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective, but that is absolutely true. And that's something that is so important to me, that we have our own voice, that we have that and take that opportunity to make sure that what's important to us is heard. And I've actually been saying this recently a lot in communication with people. If you don't yet have the confidence to be able to speak to your care provider about the things that are important to you, That doesn't make them not important to you. So write them down. And if you can't say them, share them. Even if you have to leave them with your care provider as you leave the room so that they can revisit it next time because you're uncomfortable. Take that time, take that space. It's yours. You're entitled to it, to have your questions answered so that you can get the care and the support that you deserve and you need.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I like what you just said there because it's a muscle. So maybe at your first visit, you come with a list and you give it to them. But that's how you get to the next step if you want to then talk to them verbally or something else, And so often I think on TV, advocacy looks like you went into their office and you kind of shouted and you like jumped on their desk, but in reality, like none of us goes from 0 to 60 in terms of our self advocacy.
No.
So if this isn't a muscle that you have practiced before, then starting by making a list and giving it to the provider, even at the end of the meeting, is a great way to start.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you were hoping we'd spend a few minutes chatting about today?
I think we had a really rich
I
conversation.
do
We
too.
covered a lot.
I
Yeah.
think so too. I think so too. So, as we close, before we say goodbye, would you please tell us how people can find you on the internet, on social media? What platforms and how can we find you?
Sure. So I would love it if you checked out my essays newsletter. We have also a very vibrant comment community in that newsletter. So it's really a place that invites space for folks to reflect on their own stories as well as to hear mine. And so that's finnschubert.substack.com. And if you sign up for that list, you can also find out about my other offerings when I give speaking appearances or workshops, which I'm planning to really gear up on in the coming months. My website is finnschubert.com. That's where you can purchase my previous book of essays and also where there will eventually be more information about these speaking and workshops, which will really focus on how we can claim our narrative authority, like we talked about, and how we
Mhm.
can bring together different ways of knowing scientific knowing from our personal experience or intuition so that we can feel grounded. So those are the two things I'm focusing on. I'm also on Instagram at Finn Schubert Writes. Thanks.
Love it. Love it. Well, I am very excited to keep watching your journey towards parenthood with a baby on the outside of your body and as you evolve to getting ready for that. So I will be keeping my eyes open. And I really want to say thank you so much for joining me today. As always, chatting with you is enlightening and inspiring. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.